Patricia sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the thin crack snaking across the wall. The room was silent, save for the ticking of the old clock she refused to take down, a gift from her late husband. Her hands trembled slightly as she gripped the letter she had just opened. It was from the bank. Another warning. Another reminder that the home she had lived in for over 30 years was no longer truly hers. She blinked, trying to fight the tears. "How did it come to this?" she whispered into the empty air. Just 2 years ago, Patricia had believed she was doing the right thing. Her daughter, Vanessa, bright, ambitious, full of dreams, had come to her, eyes shining with hope. "Mom, it's just temporary," Vanessa had said. "I just need a little help to get my cafe off the ground. Once it takes off, you'll have your money back. You'll be proud of me." Pride. That was all Patricia ever wanted. To be proud of her children. To feel that everything she had sacrificed, every sleepless night, every double shift she pulled after her husband passed, had meant something. So she said yes. She signed the papers. She handed over her security, her safety, her home, for love. But love, it seemed, had an expiration date. The cafe barely lasted 6 months. Vanessa blamed the economy. She blamed her business partner. She blamed the weather. Patricia didn't blame. She forgave, again and again. Even when the phone calls stopped. Even when the visits grew shorter, colder, fewer. Until now, when all that remained were letters with cold, printed warnings and a rising sense of dread clawing at her chest. Patricia pressed the letter against her heart and closed her eyes. "Maybe she doesn't know," Patricia thought desperately. "Maybe if I call her—" She fumbled for her phone, hands shaking, and dialed Vanessa's number. It rang, and rang, and then, voicemail. "Hi, you've reached Vanessa. Sorry I missed your call. Leave a message and I'll get back to you." Beep. Patricia opened her mouth, but no words came. Her throat tightened painfully. She hung up without saying anything. Somewhere deep down, she knew. Vanessa wasn't going to call back. She had already made her choice. Patricia sat there, phone in hand, staring at nothing, feeling smaller than she had in her entire life. Her house, her memories, her shelter, was slipping away, and the person she had trusted most had turned away without a second glance. The worst part wasn't the betrayal. It was the silence that followed. Patricia wiped her eyes and took a deep, trembling breath. No one was coming to save her. No one was going to fix this for her. Slowly, painfully, a new thought began to take shape in her mind. If she won't help me, maybe it's time I help myself. She didn't know yet what she would do. But for the first time in a long time, Patricia felt something stir inside her. Anger. Not the explosive kind. No, this was quieter, deeper. A slow burning flame of resolve. Patricia stood up. The letter slipped from her hand and floated to the floor. She looked around her modest bedroom. The framed photos, the worn armchair, the faded quilt. This was her life, her home, her story, and she wasn't ready to give it up. Not to the bank, and certainly not to a daughter who had forgotten what family meant. As the night deepened outside, Patricia picked up her keys and her purse. She didn't know exactly where she was going, but she knew this. She was done waiting. Patricia's footsteps echoed down the cracked sidewalk as she approached the small office building downtown. It was nearly 8 o'clock in the morning, but already the city was stirring. Delivery trucks rumbled by, tired faces shuffled into diners, and the scent of burnt coffee drifted through the cold spring air. Patricia clutched her worn leather purse tightly against her side, feeling the comforting shape of the papers she had stuffed inside last night. The loan documents, the house deed, and every threatening letter the bank had sent. She didn't know exactly what she was looking for. Advice? A miracle? Or maybe just a sign that she wasn't crazy for thinking that what Vanessa had done was wrong. She stopped in front of a small brass plaque mounted beside the door. Michael Brenner, attorney at law, family and property disputes. Patricia hesitated. Her heart hammered against her ribs. They'll think I'm foolish, she thought bitterly. An old woman who should have known better. But then she remembered the silence on the other end of Vanessa's voicemail. The coldness that had replaced the warmth she had once known. And she pushed the door open. The waiting room smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and old paper. A young receptionist looked up from her desk and offered a polite, almost automatic smile. "Good morning. Do you have an appointment?" she asked. Patricia cleared her throat. Her voice sounded smaller than she intended. "No, I was hoping to speak to someone. About my home." The receptionist's eyes softened slightly. "Mr. Brenner is in. If you don't mind waiting a few minutes, I'll let him know." Patricia nodded and sat down on a vinyl chair that squeaked under her. She placed her purse in her lap and folded her hands over it. The minutes dragged. Each second stretched into a small eternity, filled with the doubts that crept back into her mind. Maybe I'm wasting my time. Maybe it's too late. Just as she was about to get up and leave, the door to the back office opened. A man in his late 40s, with kind eyes and a professional air about him, stepped into the room. "Mrs. he prompted. Patricia Alden." "Mrs. Alden, I'm Michael Brenner. Please come in." Inside his office, the walls were lined with shelves of thick legal books. There were no flashy awards, no grand desk ornaments, just a neat, organized workspace that smelled faintly of coffee and wood polish. Patricia sat carefully in the chair across from him. "So," Michael said, folding his hands together. "Tell me what's happening." It all poured out faster than Patricia expected. The trust, the loan, the mortgage, the cafe that failed, and finally, the crushing realization that her own daughter had left her to drown in the debts they had created together. Michael listened without interrupting, only occasionally jotting down notes. When she finally finished, her voice shaking, he leaned back slightly, studying her. "Mrs. Alden," he said gently. "First of all, I'm sorry you're going through this. What your daughter did, it's not just unethical. It may very well be legally actionable." Patricia blinked. "Actionable?" He nodded. "If she misrepresented her intentions, pressured you into signing documents under false promises, and then abandoned the obligations tied to your property, there may be grounds for civil action, particularly if you can prove she benefited financially while you suffered the consequences." Patricia's heart fluttered with a strange mix of hope and fear. "But," she hesitated, "she's my daughter." Michael's expression softened. "I know, and it makes it harder. But sometimes, family causes wounds that strangers never could. And if you don't stand up for yourself, no one else will." Patricia looked down at her hands. The skin was thinner now, lined and spotted with age, but it was still her. Still strong, still capable. What would happen if I moved forward?" she asked. Michael leaned forward. "We would file a claim against her for damages. We could also petition the court for a stay on the foreclosure proceedings based on the pending action. In plain terms, it buys you time, and it sends a clear message that you're not just going to roll over and lose everything." Patricia felt a spark deep within her chest. Small, but growing. For so long she had believed that love meant sacrifice, that family meant forgiving anything, enduring anything. But maybe real love didn't mean letting yourself be destroyed. Maybe real love meant respecting yourself enough to say, "No more. I want to do it," Patricia said, her voice firmer than she expected. Michael gave her a small, encouraging nod. "Good. Then let's get started." That evening, back home, Patricia sat at her kitchen table. The house was quiet, but not with the heavy silence of defeat she had felt before. Now it felt purposeful, like the stillness before a storm. But a storm she would steer herself. She spread out the papers Michael had given her. A draft of the legal complaint, a list of financial documents he needed, a timeline of events she needed to reconstruct. It was overwhelming, daunting. But Patricia felt something she hadn't felt in months. Control. She worked late into the night, sifting through old receipts, emails, text messages. At one point, she found a photo. Vanessa, standing proudly in front of the cafe's grand opening banner. Patricia stared at it for a long time. I believed in you, she thought sadly. I still do, somewhere deep down, but believing doesn't mean I have to let you hurt me again. She slid the photo into a box and sealed it shut. Then she wrote a name across the top in bold, firm letters. Evidence. Patricia leaned back in her chair and let out a slow, steady breath. This was just the beginning. But for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid of beginnings. Weeks slipped by like pages torn from an old calendar. Each day, Patricia woke early, made herself a cup of weak coffee, and buried herself in paperwork. She answered every letter from the bank with carefully crafted replies Michael had helped her draft. She filed every piece of evidence neatly, methodically. Every call to the courthouse, every signed affidavit. Each step felt like a small act of reclaiming her life. But even as Patricia fought, a pit grew in her stomach. Vanessa still hadn't called. Not once. Not even after she received the formal notification of the lawsuit. One evening, as Patricia sat by the window, watching the sun set behind the leafless trees, headlights swept across her driveway. She froze, her hand tightening around the cup of tea she had barely touched. A sleek black car, too new, too polished, pulled up in front of her house. For a moment, she dared to hope. Maybe she's here. Maybe she realized what she's done. The driver's door opened. Vanessa stepped out, wearing sunglasses despite the dying light, a designer coat cinched tightly around her waist. Her heels clicked sharply against the cracked walkway. Patricia's heart thudded painfully. She stood up slowly, smoothing her sweater, and opened the door just as Vanessa lifted her hand to knock. They stared at each other for a long moment. Neither spoke. Patricia saw it immediately. The stiffness in Vanessa's shoulders, the tight line of her mouth. This wasn't a daughter coming to make amends. This was a daughter coming to fight. Well, Vanessa said coolly, lowering her sunglasses, you're really doing this. Patricia swallowed hard. Her throat was dry as dust. I didn't want it to be this way, she said quietly. But you left me no choice. Vanessa scoffed and pushed past her into the house without waiting for an invitation. Patricia turned slowly, watching her move through the familiar space like a stranger. The same space she used to dance through as a little girl. The same kitchen where Patricia had once baked cupcakes for her birthdays. The same living room where they had cuddled under blankets during thunderstorms. Now, it felt like none of it had ever mattered. Mom, Vanessa said sharply, spinning to face her. You're blowing this way out of proportion. It was a business investment. It didn't work out. That's life. Patricia's hands curled into fists at her sides. You promised, she said, voice trembling. You promised you'd pay it back, that you wouldn't let this happen. Vanessa rolled her eyes. Yeah, well, things change. I have my own life now. I can't be responsible for your bad decisions. Patricia felt the words like physical blows. My bad decisions? She echoed. You signed the papers? Vanessa said with a shrug. Nobody forced you. For a moment, Patricia couldn't speak. The sheer cruelty of it, the coldness, the rewriting of history, stole her breath. She had given everything, and in return, she was being told she had asked for it. Vanessa shifted, glancing at her watch. Look, she said briskly. I'm willing to work something out. I can maybe throw some money your way. You drop this whole stupid lawsuit and we move on. Clean slate. Patricia stared at her. A part of her, the part that still remembered lullabies and scraped knees and whispered secrets, wanted to say yes, to pretend this was just a misunderstanding, to hold on to what little remained. But a stronger part, the part that had spent sleepless nights reading legal codes and drafting timelines, knew better. No, Patricia said quietly. Vanessa blinked. No? Patricia lifted her chin. I'm not going to be bought off like some inconvenience. You made your choices. Now you can live with them. Vanessa's face hardened. You'll lose everything, she hissed. You think a court's going to pity you just because you're old and sad? Patricia felt the words slice through her. But this time, they didn't destroy her. They clarified everything. I don't need pity, she said, voice steady. I need justice. Vanessa let out a bitter laugh. You always were dramatic. She turned on her heel, her coat flaring behind her like a cape. At the door, she paused and threw one last glance over her shoulder. You're going to regret this. Then she slammed the door so hard the walls shook. Patricia stood there, staring at the closed door, her hands trembling slightly, not with fear, but with adrenaline. Slowly, she exhaled. The house settled around her, the silence pressing close. But this time, the silence wasn't empty. It was full of something powerful. Resolve. Patricia walked over to the dining table and picked up the manila folder Michael had given her at their last meeting. Inside were the court filings, the timeline, the evidence, and at the very front, a simple, powerful phrase. You are not alone. Michael had written it there in bold ink before handing it to her. Patricia traced the words with her finger. Vanessa might have slammed the door tonight, but Patricia was the one who would decide which doors stayed open, and which ones she would walk through with her head held high. Tomorrow was the first hearing, and Patricia would be there, not as a helpless mother begging for scraps of affection, but as a woman reclaiming her voice, her life, and her worth. The courthouse was colder than Patricia had imagined, not just in temperature, but in atmosphere. Gray walls, echoing footsteps, the sharp smell of disinfectant. People moved in and out of offices like ghosts, some anxious, some hardened by too many appearances here. Patricia clutched her coat tighter around her shoulders as she sat on a hard bench, waiting for her case to be called. Beside her, Michael flipped through a thin stack of documents with calm, professional ease. He had tried to reassure her earlier, saying they had a strong case, that Vanessa had left a clear paper trail, that Patricia wasn't imagining things. She had been wronged. Still, Patricia's stomach churned. This wasn't just about money. It wasn't just about a house. It was about standing up, finally, after a lifetime of bending. Patricia Alden versus Vanessa Alden, the clerk called. Patricia rose on shaky legs. Michael gave her a brief, steady nod. You're ready, he said quietly. She followed him into the small courtroom. It wasn't anything like she had imagined from television. No towering judges in sweeping robes, no gasps from the audience. Just a tired-looking judge at a simple desk, a clerk tapping away on a computer, and a scattering of folding chairs. Vanessa was already there, sitting with a man Patricia assumed was her attorney. A slick young man in an expensive suit who barely looked old enough to rent a car. Vanessa didn't meet her mother's eyes. Patricia sat down at her table, feeling the rough fabric of the chair under her fingertips, anchoring her. I can do this, she thought. I have to do this. The proceedings began. Formalities, introductions, the outline of the case. Michael spoke with quiet authority, laying out the facts, the mortgage, the promises, the abandonment, the consequences Patricia now faced. Vanessa's attorney countered sharply, painting Patricia as an overbearing mother who had willingly offered support without understanding the risks. Patricia listened, each word slicing into her. Is this how she sees me? A burden? An idiot? But she didn't flinch. She sat tall, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her eyes steady. When it was time for her to speak, Michael stood and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You're doing great," he whispered. Patricia took the stand. The judge asked her to explain, in her own words, what had happened. Patricia's voice shook at first, but as she spoke, about the late nights, the trust, the promises, her voice grew stronger. She didn't cry. She didn't plead. She simply told the truth. "I didn't give her that money because I wanted something in return," Patricia said, her voice echoing softly in the courtroom. "I gave it to her because she was my daughter, because she looked me in the eyes and told me it would be okay. Because I believed in her more than I believed in protecting myself." A long pause. The judge watched her silently, pen poised above his notes. Patricia's hands tightened slightly on the edge of the stand. "And when it all fell apart," she continued, "I wasn't angry that the business failed. I was heartbroken because she didn't even call. Because when everything crumbled, she didn't just lose her cafe. She chose to lose her mother." Her voice cracked, just slightly, but she caught herself. "I'm not here today because of the money. I'm here because I deserve better than to be treated like I'm disposable." Silence filled the room. Even Vanessa looked slightly paler. Patricia returned to her seat, heart pounding, but also strangely light. No matter what happened next, she had spoken her truth. And no one, not even her own daughter, could take that from her. After closing arguments, the judge said he would deliberate and deliver a decision within the week. Patricia left the courtroom with Michael at her side. Outside, the sky was heavy with low clouds, threatening rain. The air smelled like wet pavement and new beginnings. "You did it," Michael said, holding the door open for her. Patricia gave a small smile. Not a wide, triumphant one, but a real one, a hard-earned one. "Thank you," she said quietly. They stood there for a moment, the courthouse looming behind them. Finally, Michael spoke again. "No matter what the ruling is," he said, "you took your power back today. That matters." Patricia nodded slowly. It did matter, more than she had realized. That night, back home, Patricia lit a candle on her kitchen table. She made herself a simple dinner: roasted chicken, some steamed vegetables. Nothing fancy, but it filled the house with a warmth she hadn't felt in months. She didn't check her phone. She didn't wait for a call that wouldn't come. Instead, she sat by the window, a book resting unopened in her lap, and simply listened to the world outside. The soft rustle of leaves, the distant bark of a neighbor's dog, the slow, steady ticking of that old clock on the wall. Life, imperfect, messy, precious, humming around her. She had thought that losing her home would mean losing herself. But now she realized she was her own home. And no foreclosure notice, no betrayal, no slammed door could take that away from her. The week dragged by, each day heavier than the last. Patricia moved through her routines like a ghost, cleaning, cooking, sorting through old belongings, anything to keep herself from obsessing over the court decision. But at night, when the house was silent and the lights dimmed, the doubts crept in. What if they don't believe me? What if I lose everything anyway? Was it worth it? She would lie awake for hours, staring at the cracked ceiling, listening to the creak of old wood settling. And yet, beneath the fear, something had shifted. A steel thread woven into the fabric of her heart. She had already survived the worst part, the betrayal. Whatever happened next, she was not the same woman who had once signed those papers out of blind trust. She was someone new, someone stronger. The call came on a rainy Thursday afternoon. Patricia was folding laundry when her phone buzzed sharply on the kitchen counter. She wiped her hands on her apron and answered. "Mrs. Alden?" Michael's voice was calm but firm. The judge has issued the ruling. Patricia's knees almost gave out, and she gripped the counter for support. And? She whispered. You won. The world seemed to stop for a moment. The rain against the windows, the hum of the refrigerator, the trembling of her own breath. You won, Michael repeated, a small smile evident in his voice. The court agreed that Vanessa acted in bad faith. The foreclosure is halted. Vanessa is ordered to compensate you for the loan, legal fees, and damages. Patricia sank into a chair, the weight of months, years, slipping from her shoulders. She closed her eyes, letting the words settle deep into her bones. Not because she craved victory, not because she wanted revenge, but because justice, at last, had found her. Later that evening, Patricia sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, staring out into the misty twilight. The house felt different now. Not a trap, not a burden, a fortress, a place she had fought for, and won. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text message. From Vanessa. Congratulations, I hope you're happy. No apology, no remorse, just bitterness. Patricia read the message twice, then placed the phone face down on the table. She could answer. She could rage. She could plead for understanding, but she didn't. Instead, she whispered into the stillness, I am happy. I'm finally free. The next day, Vanessa showed up at the house. No warning, no call, just the sound of tires crunching wet gravel and hurried footsteps on the porch. Patricia opened the door before Vanessa could knock. Her daughter stood there, soaked from the rain, eyes wild and furious. You humiliated me, Vanessa snapped, pushing past her into the hallway. Patricia closed the door gently and turned to face her. I told the truth, she said simply. Vanessa whirled around, arms crossed tightly. You ruined my credit, my business prospects. Do you have any idea what you've done? Patricia tilted her head slightly. Do you? She asked softly. For a moment, Vanessa faltered, just a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face. But pride was a stubborn thing. I was counting on that money, she shouted. And I was counting on you, Patricia said, her voice low, cutting through the storm of words like a blade. I was counting on you to be better than this, to be the woman I raised you to be. Silence. The rain battered against the windows like a living thing. Vanessa's chest heaved. You could still fix this, she said, voice trembling with anger. Withdraw the claim? Tell them it was a mistake. Patricia shook her head slowly. No. One word, solid, unshakable. Vanessa's face twisted into something unrecognizable, a mask of betrayal, of rage, of childish indignation. You'll regret this, she hissed again, the same threat as before. But now, empty. Patricia smiled, a sad, tired smile. I already regretted trusting you, she said. I don't regret standing up for myself. Vanessa turned and stormed out into the rain without another word. Patricia watched her go, the door swinging in the wind for a moment before she closed it firmly behind her. The lock clicked into place. Not out of fear, out of finality. That night, Patricia gathered the last box of Vanessa's belongings, the ones she had kept, hoping one day they would reconcile, and placed it carefully by the front door. A photo album, a worn teddy bear, a faded graduation cap, memories of a girl who had once needed her. But now Patricia needed herself more. She didn't hate Vanessa. She mourned her, mourned the daughter she had loved, the relationship that had withered under the weight of selfishness and lies. But mourning wasn't the same as surrender. Patricia lit a single candle on the kitchen table and sat in the warm glow. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, she was at peace. She had chosen herself, and for the first time in a very long time, that was enough. The days after the final confrontation passed differently. There were no more angry texts. No more late-night doubts gnawing at Patricia's mind. No more waiting by the phone like a forgotten relic, hoping someone would remember her existence. There was only silence, and strangely, it wasn't frightening anymore. It was peaceful. Patricia spent her mornings tending the small backyard garden she had long neglected. The flower beds were choked with weeds, the soil dry and cracked from years of inattention, just like parts of her soul had been. But with every pull of a stubborn root, every turn of the earth with her old, worn gloves, Patricia felt herself healing. It was slow work, messy work, but it was hers. One morning, as she knelt beside a patch of dirt, she found something unexpected. Buried under a layer of old leaves was a small, tarnished plaque, barely readable. She wiped it clean with the sleeve of her sweatshirt. It read, "Planted with love, Vanessa, age 10. Patricia sat back on her heels, staring at the little plaque. A memory stirred. A bright spring afternoon, a tiny girl with pigtails and a gap-toothed grin planting tulip bulbs. A promise that no matter what, their home would always bloom with love. Patricia's chest ached. Where did that little girl go? She wondered. And why couldn't I save her from herself? But she didn't cry. She pressed the plaque back into the soil gently and whispered, "I loved you then. I love you still. But I love myself now too." And with that, she planted a new row of seeds, not tulips, but wildflowers. Something hardy, something that could survive storms and droughts and still find a way to bloom. Just like her. Weeks later, as summer crept closer, Patricia received a letter. Not from Vanessa, from the bank. Official confirmation: the foreclosure was canceled. The mortgage was reset in her name alone. The house was safe. Patricia ran her fingers over the embossed seal, feeling the finality of it. She had won back her home, and more importantly, her dignity. She placed the letter in a small wooden box she kept by her bedside, along with a few other things that mattered. A photograph of her wedding day. A pressed flower from her mother's garden. The evidence folder, now a symbol not of pain, but of perseverance. It wasn't much, but it was enough. One evening, as Patricia sat on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the sun dip low behind the trees, she saw a car pull into the driveway. For a brief moment, her heart jumped, old habits dying hard. But it wasn't Vanessa. It was a neighbor, Mrs. Ramirez, who lived 3 houses down, carrying a small casserole dish wrapped in foil. "I heard about everything," Mrs. Ramirez said, setting the dish on the porch railing. Patricia blinked, surprised. Mrs. Ramirez smiled kindly. "You're stronger than most. You know that?" Patricia chuckled softly, a sound she hadn't heard from herself in a long time. "I didn't feel very strong," she admitted. "Nobody does," Mrs. Ramirez said, patting her hand. "Not while they're fighting. Only afterward, when they realize they survived." Patricia swallowed the lump rising in her throat. "Thank you," she whispered. They sat together on the porch for a while, watching the fireflies dance in the growing dusk. 2 women, 2 survivors, sharing the kind of quiet solidarity that didn't need words. And for the first time, Patricia realized, family wasn't just blood. It was kindness. It was respect. It was the people who showed up when the world fell silent. Later that night, Patricia stood at the window, looking out over her small, reclaimed garden. The wildflowers were starting to push through the soil, tiny green shoots reaching stubbornly toward the sky. They weren't much yet, but they were growing. So was she. Patricia touched the cool glass and smiled faintly. She didn't know what the future held. There would still be hard days. There would still be lonely nights. But now she knew something she hadn't before. She was enough. She had always been enough. And no one, not even her own daughter, could take that away again. Summer deepened. The days stretched long and golden, spilling warm light across Patricia's small world. The garden thrived. wildflowers blooming in messy, beautiful defiance of the once barren soil. Patricia thrived too, in her own way. She started volunteering at the local library, something she had always dreamed of doing but never had the time for. She baked pies just because she wanted to, not because someone demanded it. She read novels late into the night, letting herself get lost in other people's stories, not out of escapism, but from a newfound love of life. It was a slow, quiet kind of healing. No miracles, no grand reunions, just small moments of peace building into something stronger than grief. And then, out of nowhere, came the letter. It arrived in a plain white envelope, no return address, no stamps of significance. Just her name, written in careful, almost hesitant handwriting. Patricia stared at it for a long moment, heart ticking faster in her chest. She knew. Somehow, before even opening it, she knew. Hands trembling slightly, she slid a letter opener under the seal and unfolded the paper inside. The handwriting was unmistakable. Vanessa's. Dear Mom, I don't know if you'll even read this. I wouldn't blame you if you didn't. I said a lot of terrible things. I thought that blaming you would make it easier to live with the fact that I failed. I failed you. I failed myself. I blamed you because it hurt less than admitting that I wasn't good enough. You were always stronger than me. Maybe that's why I resented you so much. You gave me everything, and somehow I convinced myself you owed me even more. I was wrong. I'm sorry, Mom. For the money, for the lies, for the way I treated you. You didn't deserve any of it. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect anything. I just needed you to know that I'm sorry. Truly. Vanessa. Patricia's hands shook as she lowered the letter to her lap. For a long time she sat there, the afternoon sunlight creeping slowly across the room, dust motes dancing in the golden beams. She felt everything and nothing. Anger, sadness, relief, hope, grief. It twisted and turned inside her, too tangled to name. She reread the letter once, twice. Each time, the words cut a little deeper, but also healed a little more. Vanessa had finally said the words Patricia had longed to hear, but they came not with a knock at the door, not with tearful apologies face to face, but on paper. Distant. Safe. Patricia folded the letter carefully and placed it beside her morning teacup. She stared at it for a long while, trying to decide what she felt. Did it change anything? Did it fix the years of silence, the abandonment, the betrayal? Number. But it was something. A crack of light in a door she thought had been sealed shut forever. Later that evening, Patricia took out a sheet of her own stationery. She sat at the kitchen table, the candle flickering beside her, and wrote, Dear Vanessa, thank you for your letter. I needed to hear those words more than you know. I forgive you. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means I choose to carry love instead of bitterness. I wish you peace. Mom. She sealed the letter carefully, smoothing the envelope with steady hands. Would she send it? She wasn't sure. Maybe, maybe not. Some things didn't need an audience to be real. Sometimes healing was something you did for yourself, quietly, bravely, without any guarantees. Patricia placed the envelope in the same wooden box by her bed, next to the foreclosure notice, the mortgage cancellation, the photo album, and the tiny plaque from the garden. All the pieces of her life. Broken, mended, beautiful. That night, Patricia stood barefoot in the garden. The stars spilled across the sky like scattered diamonds. The wildflowers swayed gently in the summer breeze, their petals glowing silver in the moonlight. Patricia tilted her head back and closed her eyes. She breathed in the night air, damp earth, blooming life, endless sky. She wasn't the woman she had been a year ago. She wasn't the woman who waited by the phone, who signed away her safety out of fear, who stayed silent while her heart was broken. She was someone new, someone who had found strength in silence. power in forgiveness, freedom in letting go. And somewhere, deep in her heart, she whispered a silent prayer. Grow, even where they tried to bury you. September arrived, painting the world in shades of amber and gold. The mornings were cool now. The evenings dipped into soft chills that whispered of the coming fall. Patricia wrapped herself in a thick, knitted shawl, one she had made years ago, back when the house had still been full of noise and footsteps, and stood on the back porch, sipping coffee and watching the garden. The wildflowers had exploded into color. Reds, oranges, purples, soft pinks. Messy and tangled, beautiful and defiant, like her. One Saturday, while sweeping leaves off the porch, Patricia noticed an envelope wedged under the door. No knock, no footsteps heard, just an envelope, simple, plain. Inside was a small card, a child's handwriting sprawled across the front. To Grandma. Patricia's heart stuttered. Inside the card was a drawing. A crayon house, a big sun in the corner, stick figures holding hands. And underneath it, written in crooked letters, "Miss you. Love you." No signature, but Patricia didn't need one. She traced the little crayon hearts with a trembling fingertip. It wasn't from Vanessa. It was from Vanessa's daughter, her granddaughter, whom she hadn't seen in almost 2 years. Tears welled up in Patricia's eyes, not from sadness, but from something sweeter, more fragile. Hope. The pure, stubborn hope that even when the bridges were burned, when the houses were emptied and hearts were scarred, something could still grow in the ashes. Something small, something real. Maybe someday that little girl would find her way back. Maybe not, but Patricia had learned something precious through the long, hard months. You can love without losing yourself. You can forgive without forgetting. You can open your heart without letting it be broken over and over. You can be a home for yourself first. She framed the little card and hung it by the kitchen window. Not as a shrine to grief, but as a symbol of resilience. A reminder that love wasn't erased by distance, that kindness, once planted, had a way of blooming in its own season. Patricia started making new traditions. She invited her neighbors for simple Sunday brunches, pancakes, coffee, laughter around her kitchen table. She joined a book club at the library. She helped organize a charity garden sale to fund local children's programs. The woman who had once been defined by her sacrifices for others was now building a life for herself. Not out of spite, not out of loneliness, but out of a deep, earned joy. And sometimes, on quiet evenings, when the stars came out and the air smelled of wood smoke and wet leaves, Patricia would sit on her porch with a cup of tea and imagine the future. She didn't know if Vanessa would ever come back. She didn't know if forgiveness would ever turn into reunion, but she knew this. Her heart was open, but not empty. Her life was full, even if it looked different than she had once dreamed. And her home, this modest house with its cracked walls and wild garden, was hers, built not from bricks and paper, but from strength, from forgiveness, from the quiet, fierce decision to keep blooming, no matter what. One evening, as Patricia tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear and watched the fireflies flicker across her garden, she whispered to herself, "They thought they buried me. But they forgot. I was a seed." And under the soft golden light of her porch, Patricia smiled. Not because everything was perfect, but because she was, exactly as she was. At last, home.